Witness what it's like to be a non-binary pregnant person and then a parent. Hello and welcome back to I'm the Zaddy. Today's episode is about a question I've been asked quite a few times, and honestly, one I've asked myself over the years too. Did I always know I was non-binary? The short answer is no, but the long answer is a lot more interesting than that. Because when I look back on my childhood, there were signs. Feelings I couldn't explain, moments that make complete sense now but didn't at the time. And I think that's true for a lot of people. Sometimes you know something about yourself long before you have the words to describe it. In this episode, I'm talking about the gap between knowing and naming. Growing up feeling different, trying to make sense of things without the language to do so, and how eventually I came to understand my identity as non-binary. I will talk about childhood memories, coming out, delayed self-discovery, why I spent years pushing parts of myself aside, and how pregnancy has added a whole new layer to my understanding of gender and my relationship with my body. Whether you're questioning your own identity, supporting someone who is, or just curious about my journey, I'm really glad you're here. So, let's get into it. I think the answer to the question, did I always know, deserves more space than people really give it. Because I think there's a pressure to know exactly who you are, as if identity has to arrive fully formed with a neat explanation and a timeline to match. But that hasn't been my experience. I use the label non-binary because it helps others understand me a little better. But if I didn't have to label myself, I probably wouldn't. My understanding of myself has unfolded slowly over time, and honestly, it's still unfolding now because identity isn't static. I wanted to make this episode because delayed self-discovery is happening everywhere right now. Not just around gender and sexuality, but neurodivergence, mental health, trauma, and relationships. People are finally asking themselves questions they were never given the space to ask before. And I personally think that deserves to be celebrated. For a long time, I felt like I wasn't non-binary enough. I'm not particularly androgynous. I have long hair. I wear mostly men's clothes. I shave my armpits and my legs. And I used to get laser hair removal on my face. And I love getting my hair cut because it makes me feel more like me. But none of those things make me more or less non-binary. I think even within myself, I had the idea of what a non-binary person was supposed to look like, and I didn't fit. But that's kind of the point, isn't it? That there isn't one way to be non-binary. I'm non-binary because I don't feel connected to traditional gender expectations, and because I don't believe bodies define identity. People make a lot of assumptions about non-binary and trans people, that we're confused, attention-seeking, mentally unwell, and it's some sort of trend. But most of these assumptions I've found come from people who've never actually been around someone living it. And gender diversity has existed throughout history for centuries. What's new is visibility. What's new is language. And what's new is people finally feeling safe enough to talk about it openly. I think my younger self would be amazed by who I am now. Not shocked. I think they would be relieved and happy and celebrate that. You know, saying things like, oh, okay, so that's what that feeling was. Because I knew I felt different for a long time before I had the words for it. I just didn't understand why. As a child, I thought maybe I was supposed to be a boy because I liked girls. I understood heterosexuality, not the word, but the social norm, way before I understood gender identity. So my brain tried to solve the problem in the only way it knew. Girls like boys, I like girls, so maybe I was meant to be a boy. Simple child logic. But I do remember having a conversation with my mum when I was young about wanting to become a boy. And looking back on that now, her response was really progressive. She said, if you still feel like that when you're older, we can do something about it then. And I remember the moment quite clearly. We were in my childhood bedroom. She was folding or collecting laundry, and I just blurted it out because I needed to, not wanted to, needed to. I don't think I was nervous. I think I was trying to solve something I didn't have the answers for. But we never spoke about it again. And because I didn't understand what do something about it meant, I quietly packed those feelings away for a lot of years. I always felt strange being grouped with girls, even when I played on girl sports teams. I somehow felt like an imposter. Not because there was anything wrong with the girls around me, but because I didn't feel like I fit in there either. Clothes were uncomfortable, and some of my happiest memories were of me and my brother dressed the same and people thinking that we were twins, and I felt comfort in that. And looking back, that feels quite significant. As a child, I loved hockey, any kind, field, roller, ice. I loved being outside. I loved getting muddy and setting fire to things. Riding our go-ped around the street, even though once I crashed it directly into a lamppost and tore the pocket off my jeans. But I also had Barbies and Polly Pockets and dolls, and I even went to Brownies after much persuasion from my mum, but I mostly just got told off there. But there was also the other side that desperately wanted an action man and kissed my Holly Valance poster goodnight. It was confusing. And I tried performing femininity to fit in, but it always felt uncomfortable and forced, and wearing dresses and trying to like boys. It was weird and didn't fit. But I envied the boys because it felt like they had freedom I didn't. They could be loud and messy, funny and reckless. Whereas being labelled a girl came with rules. Dress like this, sit like this, don't say that, and don't behave like that. And it wasn't just my parents, it was school, society, adults around me, media, everything. I think a lot of people from our generation grew up with that pressure, and as adults, we're unpacking it all in real time. Air Cadets was probably the first place where I felt genuinely free. The gender roles felt less obvious there. Everyone just got on with things, and I loved that, even though I didn't understand why at the time. At school, I also felt like I never quite fit socially. I floated between friendship groups. I had friends, good friends, but I still always felt slightly outside of things, except for one friend who I'm still incredibly close with now. They never pressured me to be anything other than myself. And honestly, that's probably why we're still friends. Coming out as gay happened accidentally. This was back in the dial-up internet days, and I was messaging a girl on my dad's work laptop when the battery died. Dad clearly opened the laptop at work and saw all of the messages because that night we had to have a chat. My dad was surprisingly calm about it all. My mum just kept saying it was a phase. And like a lot of queer people probably heard growing up, I got the, well, you'll never get married or have kids. Which is pretty funny now, really, considering this year I'm getting married and having a child. So that prediction aged pretty terribly. Coming out made me feel freer in some ways, but I still stayed guarded for years for fear of rejection. At college, nobody really cared. People just existed as themselves, and that was honestly refreshing. I had friends who were guys, friends who were girls, and nobody really needed an explanation. But at home, everything still felt very secretive. I kept things to myself. I didn't tell wider family members. I didn't talk about it. And when I started dating girls properly, I could feel that certain family members were becoming uncomfortable. And looking back now, I realised their discomfort had nothing to do with me. I also never really liked the word lesbian. I never felt like it fit me properly, so didn't use it. I used the word gay instead, even though that didn't entirely fit either. But I think at that point I chose survival over comfort. Coming out already felt disruptive enough. I don't think I had the emotional capacity to explore my gender as well. So I pushed it aside. There were years where I barely thought about gender at all. University distracted me, work distracted me, parties distracted me, and relationships distracted me too. But underneath it all, I was struggling mentally. There were periods of therapy, medication, self-harm, anxiety, depression, and honestly, I didn't have the energy to start unpacking gender identity on top of everything else. During university, I met my first wife, and we were together for around 8 years before divorcing. And after the divorce, I completely fell apart. Instead of rebuilding myself properly, I spent years drinking, smoking weed, numbing everything because it felt easier than facing what I'd buried for most of my life. It took years to rebuild, years of therapy, medication, and learning how to exist again. And during that process, I slowly started asking harder questions about myself. The term non-binary entered my life because of a friend who came out as trans. He inspired me to look inward. So one night, probably slightly high, and Googling things far too late at night, I came across the word non-binary. This was before ChatGPT or Claude existed. And it was that moment that I suddenly felt seen by language for the first time. It wasn't that I became non-binary in that moment. It was that I finally had the words for something I'd always felt. And honestly, it scared me because then came all the questions. Was this really me? Was I copying my friend? What did this mean for my sexuality? Would people understand? Would I even understand? But there was relief, a huge amount of relief, because things in my childhood suddenly made sense. Wanting to be mistaken for my brother, feeling uncomfortable grouped with girls, feeling like I floated between spaces instead of belonging to one, never feeling fully connected to any label. And it all started to click into place. And for the first time in my life, it felt peaceful. Pregnancy has been fascinating as a non-binary person with a complicated relationship to their body. Some days I feel deeply connected to it. I know the baby's movement patterns. I know when they're awake, when they're annoyed, when they want me to eat something or drink cold water. But other days my body feels borrowed, like it's performing a job that I'm grateful for, but disconnected from at the same time. My chest doesn't feel like mine right now. My stomach doesn't feel like mine. My body feels temporary somehow. And there's definitely dysphoria in that, especially around my chest. I've never really felt like my boobs belong to me, so watching them grow during pregnancy has been difficult. Necessary, but difficult. And I joke about it a lot because humour helps. But genuinely, some days it's hard to recognise myself. And the dysphoria is unpredictable. Some days I feel more feminine and I'm completely fine with that. And other days I want to crawl out of my own skin because I can't roll over in bed without dragging pregnancy pillows and a reminder of womanhood with me. One moment that really caught me off guard was wearing a sleeveless top recently that I loved last summer. It had always made me feel quite gender euphoric, comfortable, neutral, like myself. But this time I put it on and suddenly there were boobs and a bump underneath, and it felt weird and strange and I wasn't comfortable. And I didn't even realise why initially. I just became really grumpy and uncomfortable for hours until I finally understood what had happened. The shirt no longer reflected how I saw myself, and that hit me harder than expected. And at the same time though, pregnancy has also made me feel incredibly human. My body knew exactly what to do. Despite all the complicated feelings about gender and hormones and dysphoria, my body just quietly got on with growing our tiny person. And there's something deeply grounding about that, something that connects me to generations of people before me. I've also become ridiculously emotional. Before pregnancy, I rarely cried unless I was going through something genuinely traumatic. Now, an advert, a comedy, and a vaguely emotional sentence in 30 Rock, I'm gone. And honestly, I think therapy cracked me open emotionally long before pregnancy did, but pregnancy just removed the final emotional barrier. And I don't think those feelings are going back in the box now. Hopefully the boobs do once they've finished their assignment, but we'll see. Being pregnant while non-binary also means constantly existing in spaces designed exclusively for women. Forms, appointments, classes, just general conversations. And I'm constantly deciding whether to correct people or explain myself, stay quiet, or preserve my energy. And most people don't mean harm, they're just assuming. But being constantly misunderstood is exhausting. Defining myself as non-binary has helped me to understand myself much better. And it's also helped the people around me understand me too. And importantly, nothing fundamental about me changed after I found a label. I still like the same things, laugh at the same stupid jokes, play the same games, and love the same people. The only difference is that I finally understand myself better now. To anyone questioning themselves, please be gentle. There's no deadline, there's no pressure to get it right, and there is no perfect way to explore identity. You're allowed to take your time. Identity unfolds differently for everyone. And if your story looks nothing like mine, that doesn't make it any less valid or beautiful. I didn't always know I was non-binary, but I knew something didn't fit long before I had the language for it. And maybe that's what this whole episode has really been about. The years spent surviving before you finally understand yourself enough to be seen properly, even by yourself. And I'm still learning, and I think I'll always will be. But for the first time in my life, I feel at peace with the uncertainty of it. And honestly, that's enough for me. If this episode resonated with you and you'd like to share your story with me, I genuinely would love to hear from you. You can email me at getintouch@imthezaddy.com or message me on Instagram at imthezaddy.pod. Thank you for being here and thank you for listening. I'll speak to you next time. Peace.